Hi everyone, and welcome to the Publishing Performance Show. Today I'm super happy to be joined by Johnathan McClain, who is a writer, screenwriter, a narrator, an actor, and a novelist. And hopefully today we're going to be talking a bit about narration and also some of his previous work. So thanks for joining us, Johnathan.
Thank you for having me, Teddy.
Well, I mean, you've got so many different careers. The what did you say before you came on? The
polyhyphenate.
Polyhyphenate, there we go. But let's start a bit with your backgrounds and how you first got into all of the different jobs that you do.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the quickest route to this is I was a child actor, not professionally, but wanted to be an actor. Sort of began my concurrent writing and acting career by virtue of writing a one-person show that did quite well in New York, and did theater for years, and then wound up getting cast on a TV series, and then got cast on a couple more, and did TV for a good while. And concurrent to that was writing, and managed to sell a couple of TV shows that I wrote, and just very, very, very fortunate in film. And then sort of relevant to, I think, really what people would be interested in this conversation for is coming off of a TV series that I had been the sort of titular lead on for a couple of years. In 2012, I got into audiobook narrating. And for me, it was an interesting transition because having been on television for a few years at that point, and having people take my performances away and, chop up different takes and edit things together and splice together ultimately what they wanted to have on the screen. Narration for me was a really welcome relief because I am responsible, right, for the whole thing. And they're edited together to sound good, but I'm not, doing 55 takes of a page of a novel, and then someone is editing one of those in. So for me, getting the opportunity to explore that was really exciting. And I will also say that timing is everything in life, as you probably well know. And, 2012 happened to be when Amazon acquired Audible.
Yeah.
And it was because of that acquisition that the need for audiobook narrators exploded so enthusiastically, because Amazon was like, well, look, we have hundreds of millions of books, and some of them have probably never been made in audiobooks. And now we have all the money, so just do it. And so there was a desperate need for audiobook narrators. And so I got very lucky too, yet again, in that the first 3 books I narrated, 3 of the first 4 or 5, maybe not the first 3, but in that first bunch were Jack Reacher novels, were old Jack Reacher novels that had never been recorded.
Yep.
And like 3 of them, books 2, 3, and 4. And, that was a blessing and a curse, because it gave me an opportunity to really jump into the deep end of the audiobook narrating pool, but jumping into a wildly popular series that lots of people are going to listen to, that already has a voice associated with it, was it was an awakening to how much people care about audiobooks, and audiobook listeners care about the voice that's going into their ears, which makes perfect sense. But I thought, this will be great. They'll sort of welcome the opportunity to hear a different take than the guy who's been doing it for years. He's passed away now, but his name was Dick Hill, and he was a wonderful narrator. And I was like, this will be wonderful. And that turned out not to be the case. They were not as excited to hear somebody that they were not used to. But the thing was, it gave me exposure, obviously. And so, I learned a lot. I mean, I had to learn fairly quickly just how to swim in the audiobook, realm. And that's sort of where that led. And then we can or cannot talk about the fact that audiobook narrating is what led me to a concurrent novel writing career. Because I've co-written some novels now with authors for whom I have previously written. So I have novels out that I've co-written, but also one of the novelists for whom I've narrated, Amy Kaufman, who I would say is one of the top 10 most successful novelists that I narrate for. She's multiple New York Times bestseller, trad published, sci-fi writer and YA sci-fi. wildly popular Australian writer. She and I have now worked together in the last decade on, I think, 8 of her books that I've narrated. And it's gone so well that she and I, over the last couple of years, have developed an off-book friendship, and we actually have written a screenplay together because I write screenplays as well. So the audiobook thing has also led me to some of the most significant creative collaborations that I have ever had. So it's opened up a lot of doors in a lot of different ways. It's been great. It's been great.
That's amazing. The point you made just previously about being in people's ears, and people, they take it personally when stuff changes like that. When I went to the conference where I met you, I nearly got into a physical fight with someone who said that the American narrator of Harry Potter is better than Stephen Fry. I was like, no way. You guys have got to calm down on this. Stephen Fry is the ultimate here.
Well, okay. All right. I mean, Jim is amazing. But it's also, I feel like I hope it didn't really come to blows, but that
I was joking. I'm joking.
That is, yeah. I mean, but to your point, these are real debates that people really have. I mean, I see these debates happening online, and people get quite passionate about it.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you think it was your acting background really that got you that made narrating the next logical step for you?
I do. Although I don't think that it is my TV and film background that sort of set me up for that. I think it was my spending 20 years on the stage that sort of got me acquainted with what the demands of the job are. Because I've said this before, and I've said this for years, but if you are working in TV and film, it's like you're running sprints. They call action, you sprint, they call cut. If you're doing a play, it's like running a marathon, and you just sort of run. And if you are narrating an audiobook, it's an ultra marathon where you start in the mountains and run 127 miles to the sea or something like that. Yeah. And that kind of endurance, that facility with language. I mean, I have some Shakespeare training and so forth. And so all of that, I do think that, and I've historically, I think as much as anything, that in terms of what got me excited about it, yes, I think that to answer your question specifically, my acting background did set me up for an opportunity to be able to have some facility with it. But I'm a big poetry fan. I love poetry, and I just love language and words. And as is probably going to be very evident if it isn't already, I'm a fairly loquacious person. I don't have any, misgivings about talking a lot. I know this about myself. So I think that combination of love of language and the kind of performance muscles that are required to do theater and so forth. Yeah, I think that was a good opportunity that set me up well. A lot of people, I think, believe that, or those were opportunities that set me up well. I think that a lot of people believe that. I've heard this often when people find out that I've narrated audiobooks or that I do narration. They'll say, I've been told I have a great voice. Should I get into that? And my response is always you should certainly try. I would never discourage you, but the voice itself is not really the thing that I think makes an intrigue. Obviously it needs to be right and it needs to be pleasant, but that's ultimately down to casting, different voices suit different, whatever. But it's, being able to run the endurance race that is required to keep the buoyancy and the excitement and the energy of a book up for 10, 12, 14, 18, 20 hours. Some nonfiction books can be Ron Chernow's books, for example, or, the Hamilton or whatever, 37, 40, 50 hours.
Yeah.
And you have to, I think, Scott Brick narrated the Hamilton book, and Scott is, of course, as seasoned and as good as they come in this industry. And the skill set required to keep someone engaged in that way, that I think is honestly unique to audiobooks. And I don't know if you can learn it any other way than just by doing the craft repeatedly.
Yeah, for sure.
But, that's my feeling on that.
The reason I was asking about your acting background was because the reason we met in the first place was because you do some audiobooks for Podium. That's quite a big production company, and it was one of the people that I've interviewed. Victoria, it was one of the first people I interviewed, and I was just wondering about your narration style. Would you say you have a particular style, and do you adapt it at all to fit different genres or particular authors?
Yeah, I don't have. I mean, look, I have a distinct cadence. My rhythms are my rhythms. There's a music to my own sort of way of manipulating language that I think is probably permeable. I think it penetrates everything. But um, but one of the things that I am relatively invested in making sure I can do is try to narrate across multiple genres. So, I've narrated these sci-fi fantasy novels. I've now become quite full up with opportunities to narrate lit RPG, right? Which is
Yes.
an emergent genre. I wouldn't say emerging. I would say it has emerged, but still
Yeah.
semi-recent. But I've also, it's interesting. I do a lot of that for Podium. For Podium, I will narrate a lot of lit RPG, sci-fi, fantasy. Random House, for example, sort of identifies me as their mystery thriller / World War II bio novel guy.
Right.
So that's that. And then I've narrated romance, mostly under a pseudonym. And then that is its own unique animal.
Yeah.
And so it's funny. I've often said I would have had a much more successful career if I had just picked one of them as opposed to the 5 that I do. And I think the same is probably with audiobooks. If I had just focused in on narration and then, sort of TikTok niche focused, right? Like what's my niche? What's my genre? What's my subgenre? I'd probably be a lot more sort of pronounced in that thing. But blessing and curse, I tend to get bored easily, so it's nice for me. And also, I really enjoy the idea of nonfiction, tons of nonfiction that I've narrated, self-help books, things like that.
Yeah.
So in terms of how I execute that, I try to look at those things kind of like I would preparing for a role. This is not me. This is the story of this book. It's not Johnathan telling you that story. It's whoever the sort of narrative, whatever the narrative voice requires to tell that story. If it's a first person novel, it's super easy because then it's just find that character and be that character and monologue as the first person narrator for however long. When it's third person or nonfiction or something, I think my job then becomes to figure out what's the most exciting pathway into the story that can hold up over a long listening period of time. And I do a lot of prep, I just do a lot of prep in that regard.
With that prep work, could we split it into 2? So there's fiction and non-fiction. With that prep work, how does it usually work with you and the author, and how you work together? What does that preparation look like? And does, for example, the author need to prepare anything specific for you?
Mm-hmm. It really depends. There are authors who have no interest in being involved in the process whatsoever, who are on their yacht or whatever and have already sold their 1,000,000 books, and this is their 50th book, and they just want they're barely even aware that it's being narrated, right? So that happens.
Yeah.
Then obviously with people I've collaborated with frequently for years, I have an inroad to them. Normally I will through the publisher. I've never narrated for someone not through a publisher, whether they're a large house or a small house. I've never narrated for someone just one-to-one. So I don't know what that would be like. That feels like it would be a very easy way to make sure that you're hitting all the X's and O's. I typically ask the publisher to get in touch with the author if I have specific questions. By the time I've been asked to come on a book, though, I've either been requested by the author or I've been recommended by a casting team and they've heard my work. Or in some instances, and I'm even at the point that I am now, I know some people don't like to audition. I don't care. I'll audition for anything. If it's like, this person wants to hear you do this thing that you've already done 55 times, I'm like, okay, I'll do their thing and they see if they like it. So usually by the time I get into the book, we're all on the same page in terms of general tone and so forth. And then the question asking mostly becomes about, this character whose name seems unpronounceable. How would you like it done? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trust put on a narrator. A lot of trust put on a narrator by the author and the publisher to trust that you are going to, give them what it is that they are expecting. And I feel like, if the intention is right, then generally it works out pretty well. There are, look, I'm not going to say any names or anything, but there are anecdotes out there that I know of people having recorded books and it's not gone well and they've had to re-record them. These things do happen, but it's exceedingly rare, because I think that the process is set up to make sure that you've got the right person before you start the job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if writers are coming to you with manuscripts, is there usually just a case of just giving you the book, or is there a way of formatting it that means it's easier for you to read out, like kind of more like a script?
It's a great question. So yeah, if I have had there are some publishers, smaller ones, who will send me Microsoft Word doc versions, just like the actual version that they proved for, right? And I just have my assistant like convert that into a PDF and whatever, so that I can put it into a software on my iPad called iAnnotate.
Right.
iAnnotate is great because, as opposed to other softwares where you sort of like fan through pages like you might on Kindle, it's a scroll. So I can just keep the page scrolling, and there's no sound, and it doesn't hiccup at all, and so forth. And you can also make notations right on the document in that software. So if in my prep, I need to remember that this character speaks with an Irish lilt or whatever, but that's not revealed until much later, I will, make a notation the first time we hear them speak in the margins of the thing and so forth. So yeah, like getting like a nice clean PDF is great. Ideally formatted the way that it would be formatted for ebook or for print, so that it sort of looks on the page the way it would look to a reader. Because on some sort of subconscious level, I feel like that makes a difference. I feel like if I am reading aloud a book that is formatted in the way that I would be reading it if I were just sitting in my bed reading before I went to sleep, then there is a natural sort of musical, like I keep going back to this idea of rhythm and tone, but I think it matters. There's a natural sort of cadence that evolves from that if you're just reading a scrunched up bunch of text, just like all formatted together, single spaced or whatever, is a much harder thing to do. That's just a harder lift. The other thing I would say to authors, any author sort of starting out, if they want to do a big, big, big favor for their narrator, just really spend the money and time to make sure it is fully proofed, like really well, because a challenging thing is to have to edit on the fly. Because something that can be fine in a typo on the page, if you're reading, okay, a reader's going to like understand what that's supposed to be, but I can't read that aloud because that will sound insane. If I something that's, or some syntax that's out of whack or some grammar that's not right. So having everything really clean not only makes the process smoother in terms of the output, but it makes my job infinitely easier. Like I've often said, I would prefer to be paid. This is terrible. Whatever, I'll say it. I would prefer to be paid more. I'll work for cheap for a great book, but if it's a terrible book, or if it's like really badly put together or really badly constructed, you're going to have to pay me more to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're a bit picky with who you can work with now, I guess.
I'm not. Well, it's not that I'm picky. I mean, I honestly, if I get excited about the idea of a story, even I'll do it. I'll do it 100%. I think there are narrators out there who are booked however long out in the distance and, can't be gotten to or whatever. But a good example is I'm going to cycle off of me for a second and talk about Julia Whalen, who is probably the preeminent female audiobook narrator on the planet.
Right.
Yeah, right. She's narrated, I think, 1,000 or more. She is herself a 2-time New York Times bestseller. She's the only narrator that I know who's ever been profiled on CBS Sunday Morning. She's the only narrator that I know who's, had 2 puff pieces written about her in the New York Times. And she's also started her own audiobook company, actually recently, called Audiobrary. And I was very fortunate to be asked to be part of the inaugural offering in that. It was a book that she wrote. And she had 4 narrators, 3 men and her, and I was one of them. The reason I brought her up is that we met because I had written a novel that had interstitial chapters that required a separate voice. And Podium, who you mentioned, published that novel. I know them very well. We go way back. And they said, well, who would you like for these chapters? I was like, well, I'd like Julia Whalen, but I mean, good luck making that happen. And they showed it to her and she was like, oh no, this is cool. Yeah, no, I'm into this. Let's do it. And that's how I feel about it. Like if it's something cool or whatever, and it feels fun and it feels exciting, if I feel like I can bring something to it. I've only a couple of times ever passed on something, honestly. And one was a biography of someone that I know who's very famous. And it was an unauthorized biography. And I simply couldn't do that. You know, I'm not going to, if my famous friend was like, don't write a book about me, and they did it anyway, I'm certainly not going to narrate it. And the other one was a few years back, I'm also not particularly squeamish. I'll talk about anything. I'll narrate anything. I'll narrate the hardest of hardcore erotica. I don't care. But there was one book that I thought lacked merit artistically, to be polite, that I bowed out of. But that's it. Like, other than that, I've narrated like 200 something books at this point. Cool. So, you know, I mean, I'm more than happy to jump into anything. Anybody listening, hit me, shoot, hit me up on my website. I'm available. I'll do whatever. I don't care.
When you're doing the erotica books, do you have to use sound effects as well, or is it just the words?
If post-production wants to put in, you know, like some wah-wah guitar, some squeaking bed coils or something like that, that's up to them.
Some Marvin Gaye.
Yeah, exactly right. Some Luther Vandross in the background. I mean, it's look, narrating stuff like that is frequently dual narration, and more it's duet narration. The difference, of course, being, in case anyone doesn't know, dual narration is you have a guy narrating the guy's chapters and a woman narrating the woman's. Duet is what I did with Julia on this book that I just mentioned of hers, which is Sebastian York, very, very famous, probably the preeminent romance narrator for men, at least. Sebastian did the primary narration, but in the scenes with other characters, she cast those. And so then it was edited together like a little radio play. Like I would talk when I was playing my character. Eduardo Ballerini would talk when he was playing his character. She would do her thing. And so that's duet narration. And so duet's great because then you're just playing your character and it's not that challenging. Dual is hard because you're narrating with someone else. But in your sections and chapters, you're narrating both halves. So you're also wanting to try and honor as much as possible, like what, in my case, what the woman's voice is for the character that she's performing. And then she's going to try and the best that she can emulate the quality that I bring to the thing. And you don't, you know, if anyone listening knows who Jeff Hayes is, like Jeff narrates the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, which is arguably one of the most popular audiobooks on the planet, and rightly so. Jeff's freakishly gifted, and his female voice. I mean, it sounds like he's got a whole cast, and it's just him. It's mind-boggling. Yeah, I don't have that skill set. That's not me. So I just try and find like the general attitude and energy of a character as best I'm able, and then inject that into it. And so to your question about sound effects and whatever, I mean, no, other than I don't want to make it sound stupid. I want to make sure I don't sound dumb, especially when I'm doing like a breathless lady who's caught up in the throes of passion. I want to make sure that doesn't sound insane and pull the listener out of it. And you know, like there's a fine needle you have to thread when you're trying to, you know, do an orgasm in audiobook, and someone's going to have to listen to this, and they probably have earbuds in, and you don't want, I mean, you know, it's the most hilarious job in the world, honestly. You know? So,
yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds like with your first audiobooks you narrated, you kind of, because obviously you had a bit background and you already had success in acting and other all the other things you do. It sounds like some of your first audiobooks were actually relatively successful books already. But if we just think back to when you were just starting out, and a lot of people who listen to these books, they're not necessarily they're sort of towards the beginning of their writing journey, so that maybe they're not at the level where they could get someone like Podium style production.
Right.
When they're selecting a narrator, what sort of things should they look for when they're trying to get a best fit for their book?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think that shoot for the moon. If you have a narrator that you really like I just said, most of us have websites. Most of us have contact tabs on those websites. Reach out to the narrator that you love. If you have someone, shoot for the stars first. I would say always just give it a go. Who knows? So that would be the first thing. If you don't have a voice in your head, if you don't have someone in mind, then you've created the material. You have every right to request auditions. And there are voice casting websites. There's ACX, of course, through Audible, right? ACX is where a lot of pairings can happen because that's a self-produced arm of Audible.
Are you
Studios.
on ACX as well, or not?
I am not. But I do know that, plenty of narrators someone asked me recently, how do you get into narrating? And I was like, when I did it, it was a little bit easier. And now, P.S., I'm going to digress from my own point to mention that I will say the challenge that exists now, it's both a blessing and a curse that everyone can sort of do it from home. Mm-hmm. Because, in 2012, there weren't real, I didn't have a home studio until 2020. And the only reason I even got one was because COVID happened and I owed books to people and I had to figure out how to do them. I was always going to production houses and studios and so on. So the competition is stiffer because there's lots of people with the resources to buy a mic and a preamp and get it set up. But the benefit to that is you go to ACX, you go to that casting pool, and you just listen through to the voices that feel like they might match the material that you've written. And most people will have identified the age range, the sort of 30 to 35 female that can play 22, like the genres that they feel like they excel in, the age range, the quality of voice, the pitch, the so forth and such on. And I think it's kind of like, if anybody who's listening to this has ever played in a band and you've auditioned bandmates, everybody's, okay, we need a new bass player. Well, they can all play bass, but something about that person just felt like the one that feels like their style matches with what we're doing. That's the one. And there's that intangible quality that I think you have to listen for. And then everything else is just up to personality and do you vibe and are their rates right and, all that kind of stuff. But ACX is the best resource that I know of. Audible really does have the market largely cornered.
There's Findaway Voices for people that aren't in. So ACX, I think, is only available still for UK, US, and maybe Ireland. But I think that's so. I think Findaway Voices is a good option for people who aren't.
Findaway Voices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's quite a good one too.
I'm sure a quick internet search would tell you where you can find any number of places to track down narrators.
Yeah. What's the publishing process like when you're working with a company like Podium? So what I mean by that is from giving you the script, how long does it take to usually get that book published using something like Podium or a professional service like yourself? And how long does that take?
Depends on the series, I think. Some of, if it's a really popular series, they're going to want to have a lot of lead time. So the book will be up for pre-order months before anything actually goes into production. I give you the example that I have off the top of my head right now is I finished, because I have several getting ready to come out that I finished at the end of last year. So I have, over the next 2 months, I think 3 or 4 titles coming out that I wrapped principal recording on in December. and then one of them I just did pickups. So I think from start to finish, it can take a number of weeks to record a book. Maybe I should dial in on that first. If you have a timeline, then you should make sure that the person that you're getting involved with has the time to give to it. If it's a big traditional publishing house like Random House or Harper or something like that, they are assuming that you're going to give them 6-hour days, 7-hour days, recording every day. And that 12-hour book will be done in 3 days, 4 days, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I'm recording, self-recording with no director, no other engineer, and I'm just at home and I'm alone by myself, I usually try to say, if it's say a 15-hour book, or will come out to be roughly that, which is approximately 150,000 words. It's not a 1-to-1, but it's roughly that. I will ask for 3 weeks to a month to get it recorded, because with everything else I've got going on, I can't do a 7-hour day every day. So it'll be like a couple chapters a night before I go to bed or whatever. So the recording process can take 3 to 4 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, give or take. If you're talking about just self-recording. And then the mastering and engineering process, I don't do that myself. There are narrators who do have that skill set and are happy to do it. And usually, when I'm approached by a new publisher, they'll ask me what my rate is, and I tell them, and then they say, okay, is that for everything? And I'm like, no, you're also going to have to hire somebody else. I'm sorry.
To edit it, yeah.
But then that part has to happen. And then, of course, once it's been listened to and sweetened and mastered, then the pickups happen, and I think that if you're a narrator, by the way, this is a mistake I made early on. I'll just say this for anybody who might be curious about this. If you're a narrator and you're starting out, don't worry about making mistakes. Go for performance, go for delivering the material, deliver the best book you possibly can. And if you're doing punch and roll and you hiccup, it doesn't matter. No one's going to have to edit that out. You stop. So as opposed to sort of free roll where you just make mistakes and then an editor later will clean it up. And that's a very rare thing that rarely happens anymore. Most of the time you're stopping, placing your marker back where the track had a hiccup and then picking it up. And you're still going to have mistakes that you've missed or things that your eyes read wrong or whatever. Don't worry about it. Those things can be cleaned up. Those things can be put in. What you can't, I'm less interested. I'm not going to get on my AI soapbox, but if you wanted a perfect read that had absolutely no mistakes in it, just get a computer to do it. Like if you're, give it everything and don't worry about perfection. So I think that I've seen books go from start to finish anywhere from a couple of weeks, like truly, like really being turned around fast, to most of the time, the ones I'm doing for Podium, for example, I get the script in November, I record in December, the book will come out in March, right?
Yep.
So, but I think that some of those are ready now. A couple of them are like done. And I think, again, the long lead time is just about the popularity of the series and giving people a chance to pre-order and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the last thing I'll say in regard to this, which is a tangential point, but also know what your boundaries are when you're recording. If you're someone who wants to narrate and you're listening to this, don't push yourself for 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours. Just like give the work its due, because at the end of the day, this will be memorialized for good. It will be done. It will be out there. And these are the books that if I wish I could go back and re-record those Jack Reacher books, knowing what I know now, I would have done a better job, frankly. So just make sure you're giving it your all, because that's your work out there. That's your voice,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's really good advice. Now, I know you're narrating your own book, and I know it's under a pseudonym, but it's still...
I am not. No. The book I'm narrating... No, my own books that I'm narrating now are under my name.
Oh,
Johnathan
your name,
McClain wrote and narrates, yeah.
Right, okay, sorry. So technically you're DIYing it. Now, I know you're professional, so it doesn't count as DIYing it, but a lot of authors now, there's ways you can sort of narrate the books yourself, and especially when people are on a bit of a budget, or they maybe it's especially if it's a non-fiction book, sometimes people want to be like the face of their book. Now, have you got any tips for people who are starting out trying to do a narration of their own book, and any skills they might need to skill up on?
Sure. Give yourself more time than you think you need, because when it's your own book, you're going to go back and re-record everything a dozen times because you know exactly what you intended. It takes me longer to record my own books. And to be clear, I should be clear, like my books are published by this novel series that I have out right now is being published by Podium. So I am technically double dipping. So I'm getting
You're
the
cheating
money for the books, and then, but I think that tips, know your boundaries, know your limitations, be the most honest version that you can. As much as this is just from someone who has been in front of a camera for over half my life. It is very easy, and a microphone. It is very easy to get self-conscious about these things. To whatever degree you can, separate yourself from the product. Separate yourself from the idea that, you know, the end product needs to sound like this or be like this or whatever, and enjoy the process. Remember why, especially if you're a writer, even if it's nonfiction, why did you want to write this book? What did you want to say? What about it is important? Why is that important? And remember to just hold on to that in everything that you say when you're speaking the words aloud. The other great advice, and this is something that I've done commercial and, you know, video game narration and stuff too, but especially in commercials and auditioning for adverts and so forth, for voiceover. The best advice that you'll get from any like voiceover coaching person is talk to one person. Tell the story like you're telling it to one person. Tell it like you're telling it to your best friend if it's a nonfiction, like, man, this really cool thing that I know about that you should know about, bro, or last, or whatever. And tell it to one person. And, you know, if it's fiction and it's something that it feels like it's cinematic and whatever, tell it like you're telling it around a campfire. But you know, find that group of people that you're talking to, or that person that you're talking to, and talk to them. The other thing I would say is it is physically harder than you're going to expect it to be if you've not done it. The microphone picks up everything. So you can't move. You can't shuffle. You can't breathe wrong. You have to make sure that you're limiting mouth noise. A lot of these things can be cleaned up in After Effects and so forth, but it is an endurance test. I mean, sometimes I come out of the booth really exhausted, like really physically tired.
Yeah.
And also give yourself a break. If like you get into the booth and it's not going, stop, go eat a sandwich, come back. You know what I mean? Like get yourself into a place where you're excited to share the work that you've written.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I can offer. And remember always that it's not about you. This is something I don't think a lot of people talk about, or maybe they don't, maybe they know it and don't say it, or maybe they don't know it. I don't narrate audiobooks so that people will think I'm awesome. I narrate audiobooks because I love telling stories and I want people to enjoy the stories that I'm telling. It's not about me. My job is to be the delivery mechanism for the story. So like get out of the way and let the story be the star. And I know that's a very sort of high-minded concept, but I think it's important.
Yeah, that's really important. Take your ego out of it. Remember, you're trying to read the book, not promote yourself. I think that's quite good advice.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, like this is what when I talk about, you know, I've narrated books that I don't like that aren't for me, that aren't books that I would read, but they're for somebody. And I just try to remember, like, there's somebody who's out there who's, you know, going to enjoy this. And I owe it to them to give it my all. I owe it to them to give it my all because they've made a commitment. Yeah. Someone recently asked me, does it bum you out if you get bad reviews? And I'm like, yeah, but not because I feel like bad for me. It's because I've got I've got almost an overly healthy ego, frankly, probably too healthy. But it makes me feel like sad because I didn't mean to give you a bad experience. Yes, it makes me sad because like, oh, I'm sorry you hated it. I mean, I don't take it personally. I just wish that I made your day go badly, and now I'm sad. You know what I mean? Like that's how I feel about it. But that's centered in this idea of try to give the gift as opposed to making it about you.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned a couple of mistakes that you make, and are there any common mistakes that you find either you make or that narrators make, and is there any ways you try and overcome them? You mentioned mouth noises and things like that, but are there any
mouth noises? Yeah, that's a real thing. I mean, that's a real thing, and if you keep a bottle of water in the booth. Definitely keep a bottle of water in the booth. Keep hydrated. If you hear it coming, if you feel like, oh, I've been talking for a while and now it's getting a little dry mouth. It's also hard to the more you do it, the easier it becomes to like be self-editorial as you're going. But you don't want to get overly consumed with worrying about these things. As I said before, because those things can be fixed. But for me, an obsession is, even though I know that the editors and mastering teams that I'm sending this stuff off to are professionals and they're very good, I don't trust people to always get the like little breaths out. And so if I have to stop and punch in, I make sure that I have lined up the cue exactly so that you're not going to get a little like at the beginning, because if you get a little clipped at the beginning, you'll know that it was edited. I mean, I try to send in my files as sounding as much like the final as possible. So that you will attune yourself eventually to listening for, I live in LA, which is, as we record this, beset by fires. I'm under a possible evacuation notice at the moment in my house. And so, there will be planes and fire trucks. I have to record today. If I don't get evacuated, I will be recording. And I just need to make sure that my ear is tuned for a truck rolling down the street or a plane flying by or a helicopter, trying to be sensitive to that. And once you get sensitive to that, by the way, you notice it every day in all parts of your life. It becomes maddening. So those things, but yeah, just don't overexert yourself. Know what your limitations are, and remember this: it's a muscle, and just like any muscle, the more you do it, the stronger the muscle will become. The weight of recording an audiobook has not gotten lighter. I've just gotten stronger at lifting it. Right. Yeah. So just and practice. Even if you're not, getting paid for it, spend some time behind a mic, just practicing recording things. And anybody else starting out, a note that I would say is get a good mic, but don't get a great mic. By which I mean, get a mic that gives a nice, good quality, a nice sound. I use an Audio Technica 4040 and a Solo Focusrite Preamp. It's nothing exotic. It's great. And I've now recorded over 100 books on it. The mic I got is good enough to get exactly the sound that I want, but not so good that it's going to pick up all those little creaks of my house settling and so forth, like I talked about a second ago. So that's, you don't have to spend $3,000 on a mic. You can spend $300 on a great mic, on a good mic, and it's good enough to do what you need it to do.
Yeah.
So that would be the other thing I would suggest.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, just for the last question. So obviously you've worked on some amazing books like Jack Reacher books and Lee Child, which that must have been absolutely amazing. What projects have you got coming up this year that are really exciting?
Well, I will continue narrating my own series, which
the sexy series.
This is this fantasy series. It's a 5-book fantasy series that I'm co-writing with Seth MacDuffie, who is a fairly successful fantasy sci-fi lit RPG author. It's called Meet Your Maker. We signed a multi-book deal with Podium, and the first one came out in October. And the reason I bring it up in part is because, apropos of our conversation, it just got a very nice review in Audiophile magazine, which is another place, one can look to see what's going on. It got a very, very nice review. And I knew it was something that I was proud of. Like, I'm not ambiguous about that, but it's nice when a trade publication ratifies your estimation of yourself. So that will be a large part of my year, honestly, because I have to write it and narrate it. So the second one. So that's a big thing coming up. There is a lit RPG series that I narrate. This is probably the most well-known. It is called the Newtown series. The Mayor of Newtown was the first of these books in 2019, and we are now on to book 8, which is War of the Noobs. And that is the one I just finished and turned in. And the one that I probably get asked about on social media and stuff the most. I have, like I say, several other new series that I'm starting that have been sent my way. But invariably, the year will get, I have my year plotted out, but invariably I'm going to get a call about something or an email about something that I can't say no to. And I will absolutely be over the moon to jump in. There are a couple of mystery writers who release about a book a year. Wonderful, wonderful New York Times, best-selling author called Linwood Barkley, who I narrate his books now. I know he has a new one coming out, so I'm hopeful that will be a fit for me. Like I said, I got like 20 this year that I know of, which funnily doesn't feel like a lot anymore. There would have been a time when I would have said, oh my God, how am I going to do it? And I'm like, I can take 10 more.
Yeah.
That'd be fine. Yeah. So those are some, I don't know, those are things to look. I mean, the other thing is if you just type in my name, Johnathan McClain, make sure you spell Johnathan, Johnathan, because that is how it is spelled.
Yeah.
If you type my name into Audible, you can see everything I've got coming up. Oh, and that's the other thing, by the way, anybody who's getting into, to audiobooks on either side, Audible's great about giving you those 5-minute samples. Yep. So find other books that you feel like they're complementary to either the style that you want to do or that you've written or whatever, and just listen to the samples of those narrators. That's a great, free education in how to get your mouth around the process or your ears around it if you're looking for somebody.
Yeah, great. That's really good advice. You've got a bit of a quiet year then coming up, which is quite nice.
Well, that's just the recording thing. I also
I'm joking.
have 2 TV series and a thing. And no, it's funny. It's funny you say that. And I'm like, if it were just the recording, it would be quiet. It would be great. I could totally do that. Yeah, I could totally do that. If I didn't also have to write a book and 2 movies and pitch 2 TV shows, it would all be fine. And at some point, I'm going to get tired of all of this. And I'm deeply grateful that audiobooks exist. And I certainly hope that I can continue on with it, because this is the thing that I can see myself doing into my 70s and 80s, long after my ability to, go into a room of TV executives and make them love me is over. I can still sit in a dark room and talk.
You'll be like Michael Caine, where you suddenly get that wise voice, which and start speaking slowly. Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Johnathan, for coming on. It's been fascinating to speak to you. Good luck with the rest of the year. It sounds like you've got a lot going on, so I'm looking forward to seeing what comes up next.
Thanks, Teddy. Thanks for having me.
So just before we go, we always ask this question to everyone, and that's, what's a book you recommend everyone should be reading?
I'll give you 2. One I have nothing to do with, and one I have a lot to do with. James, the Percival novel that was out last year. That's the story of Jim, the slave from the Huck Finn books, told from slave James' perspective.
Okay.
It was shortlisted for the Booker. Orbital is the book that won the Booker this year, but James is it's important. You know what I mean? It's an important book. So read that, listen to that. And then my best friend and sometimes collaborator, he and I wrote a film together called The Outfit that starred Mark Rylance. My friend Graham Moore is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter. He wrote The Imitation Game, but he's also a novelist. And his most recent novel, called The Wealth of Shadows, that I happen to narrate. So not only is he my best friend and sometime co-writer, but I also narrated the book. But it's wonderful. If I said to you, hey, you want to read the most interesting book about trying to establish the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in order to perhaps cripple the Nazis' attack on America in 1939, you'd be like, does such a book exist? And I would say, yes, it does. And it's called The Wealth of Shadows. Like, he's such a good writer that he made everything I just said sound interesting. So I would recommend that people check that out, because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. So those are the two that I would go for. And I'm sure Malcolm Gladwell probably has something out right now that I don't know about, but anytime Gladwell drops a book, like, read that, because they're always great.
Yeah. I don't know how you time to read it, but yeah, I'm sure you'll fit it in.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, good luck for the rest of the year. It was fascinating chatting to you, and thanks for coming on the show. We'll speak soon.
Thank you, Teddy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Publishing Performance podcast. I really hope you found today's episode inspiring. I love chatting to authors, writers, and people in the publishing world. Now, just before we wrap up, let me tell you about Publishing Performance, the #1 platform for authors who want to increase Amazon book sales, but are not really sure where to start. Now, this show is all about helping you to sell more books. And if you're looking to boost your publishing game and to maximize your book's potential on Amazon, then Publishing Performance is designed to help authors just like you to grow your readership and to reach a much wider audience. Now, I know that Amazon ads can be slightly complicated, which is why Publishing Performance is like having a personalized ad account manager to create your ad campaigns, to choose your best keywords, and to make adjustments in real time. Now, if you're investing in ads, you really want to make sure that your investment is being used effectively, and Publishing Performance does just that. It aims to make your budget go further, improve your organic rank, and target keywords more effectively. Just go to publishingperformance.com to get started with Amazon ads for just $1. Thank you so much for tuning into the Publishing Performance podcast. I really hope you found today's episode inspiring. I love chatting to authors, writers, and people in the publishing world. Now, just before we wrap up, let me tell you about Publishing Performance, the #1 platform for authors who want to increase Amazon book sales, but are not really sure where to start. Now, this show is all about helping you to sell more books. And if you're looking to boost your publishing game and to maximize your book's potential on Amazon, then Publishing Performance is designed to help authors just like you to grow your readership and to reach a much wider audience. Now, I know that Amazon ads can be slightly complicated, which is why Publishing Performance is like having a personalized ad account manager to create your ad campaigns, to choose your best keywords, and to make adjustments in real time. Now, if you're investing in ads, you really want to make sure that your investment is being used effectively, and Publishing Performance does just that. It aims to make your budget go further, improve your organic rank, and target keywords more effectively. Just go to publishingperformance.com to get started with Amazon ads for just $1.